of America. I'm Steve Gruber, ready to fight for you from the foxhole of freedom, giving you better analysis and insight than anyone else. Shine a spotlight into the darkness, delivering truth and justice when you needed it most. Here are three big things you need to know to start your day today. Number one, more than 150 Republicans are condemning Joe Biden's push for EVs with no off-ramp and no real plan to get us where we need to be. Number two, Budweiser in the untenable position now of buying back expired Bud Light because the full collapse of the brand means it's not selling, down more than 30% in many areas. And number three, let's take some time to discuss equality, equity, and race. And while I'm at it, how about diversity, equity, and inclusion? I mean, after all, the Democrats spend a whole lot of time proclaiming racism and the leading concern when it comes to domestic terrorism. Of course, they offer no facts to support such a thing except for thin anecdotal stories and claims from the long and thoroughly discredited Southern Poverty Law Center that has labeled churches as hate groups for having the nerve to teach what the Bible actually says. Beyond that, the SPLC can offer pretty much nothing to support the ridiculous narrative and notion that America is a hopelessly racist nation with basically no redeeming qualities. None of that is true, of course. I mean, the two go-to attacks on anyone who is not a card-carrying socialist or Democrat are racism and climate denier, or something like that. Even when Republicans elect more black and Hispanic members to Congress, it is waved off as tokenism and nothing to take seriously. They dismiss President Donald Trump getting more black and Hispanic votes in 2020 than any Republican in history as equally irrelevant. But surely, if a black Republican senator from the Deep South who has been elected twice already decides to run for president, well, then the Democrats would certainly stand and applaud that, right? Well, no, of course not. They will instead ramp up the attacks and do even more smear jobs and attacks. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott announced his run for president and said he is the American dream in doing so. Here's part of that announcement.
And today, I'm living proof that America is the land of opportunity and not a land of oppression. Amen. But you see, this isn't just my story. It's all of our stories. The circumstances and the situations may be different. The details may change. But every single one of us are here because of the American journey, where there were obstacles that became opportunities, and our pain revealed our purpose.
So there you have it. Senator Tim Scott is in the race for president as a Republican. I like the senator. He is a conservative voice in a world of crazy left-wing zealots, and you would think the Democrats would at least say, okay, well, he's a good man. But don't kid yourself. As we've already figured out with Byron Donalds, Burgess Owens, and John James being black and conservative, is like putting a target on your back for every hateful slur the left can muster. How dare they leave the reservation without permission? How dare they dump us for those conservative monsters who believe they should raise their own kids, have us saying what is taught in school, and that boys and girls should not compete against each other in sports? How outrageous. The NAACP, fresh off putting up a travel warning for black people headed to Florida, weighed in on Senator Scott jumping into the race. It was exactly what you would expect because the NAACP took shots at Scott, a black Republican, in the race for president. Listen.
Just next hour, the only black Republican in the Senate, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, is expected to announce his candidacy for the White House. What are your thoughts on his candidacy?
Well, I wish him the best. This is not a partisan issue. Our issue about racism and otherizing isn't a partisan issue. It's an issue around humanity. And if individuals who offer themselves up to run for office and they operate within the confines of just human dignity, then I think he has a right. I've talked to Tim Scott. I think he's a decent guy, and I hope he don't fall prey to this type of appeal to the lowest common denominator of humanity.
Appeal to the lowest common denominator of humanity. exactly what the gentleman from the NAACP did right there. Appealing to smear and slur and denigrate. Now, for the senator's part, it's also what he has been expecting because it is something he has been dealing with ever since he began representing the Palmetto State in the U.S. Senate and the House before that. Senator Tim Scott says he is the candidate the far left fears the most. True or not, here's what he said.
Speaking before a crowd in his home state of South Carolina, Scott, the only black Republican senator, highlighted his background as an example of America's opportunity and as a rebuke of President Biden and Democrats.
I'm the candidate the far left fears the most. When I cut your taxes, they called me a prop. When I refunded the police, they called me a token. When I pushed back on President Biden, they even called me the N-word. I disrupt their narrative. I threaten their control. The truth of my life disrupts their lives.
And so what about the NAACP warning black Americans to avoid Florida? They just did that, if you missed it. What exactly is that based on? Well, it's based on the fact that Donald Trump lives there and Ron DeSantis is the governor there. It really is that obvious. It is a naked political smear job aimed at the good people of the Sunshine State, the free state of Florida, for no other reason than the two leading candidates for president, Donald Trump far and away in first place, Ron DeSantis in second place, and Tim Scott, God bless him. Maybe he's running to be a running mate or a member of the cabinet. I don't think it's likely that he rises to the top. But the way that he was treated is what I wanted to explain to you here today and why it is wrong. And how twisted are the minds of the left-wingers? Well, here is a woman who just took spring break with her family in Florida, a black woman, and then calls it a terrorist state. You can't make this stuff up. Listen to this.
You know, I just took my family to spring break in Florida recently, and I think about all of the folks who traveled there for sun and joy and peace and restoration. And to be reminded that actually this is getting to the point where Florida is about to be a terrorist state to many of us here in America. Certainly as a lesbian, as a black woman, I don't want to have anything to do with the place. And I think about all the other people who don't want to travel there either. And so I think it was very clever on behalf of the NAACP. I thank them for issuing this broad guidance. And, you know, really what it does is it turns a remarkable, I think, lens on the United States and highlights how bigotry and bias and ignorance do as much harm as we accuse other countries of doing to people that they suppress.
I want nothing to do with the place. Well, after a spring break, after I take my whole family there for rest and relaxation, what a dishonest individual. Aisha, whoever her name is, doesn't matter. What a dishonest individual. Lying about Florida and the people of Florida. At some point, wouldn't you think that facts would matter in the conversation? Nah, it's Democrats. I'll have a lot more on this disingenuous conversation about Florida, the NAACP, and race and politics in America today after the break. It's the Steve Gruber Show.